Talk to me about Liverpool, Roy, in terms of how you found it there. Obviously a passionate city, big club, and it didn't last very long there. What do you take away from that job in terms of how it was there?
I went to a club really where there was a change of ownership and no one quite knew what the new owners were going to want. And also I went to a club, again, arrogance is probably the wrong word, but believing that I know that there's large swathes of fans who don't think that I'm the right man for the job, that Kenny Dalglish is the man that they want to come back and do it.
Did you sense that straight away?
Oh yeah, that was clear straight away, and it was made even more clear when the new owners came in, because the first thing they went to all these various Spirit Shankly groups, etc., and canvassed them. We weren't winning. You know, I'd have had to have any chance of success at all, I'd have had to go in there and from the first games start winning and getting results and playing some football, rather than struggling as we were, you know, near the middle of the table and you know, in the same way I suppose Liverpool were doing until recently. They've had a really good run. So it was always going to be an uphill battle from that. But I think probably the most pertinent thing, and I wasn't aware of it really at the time, but Jamie Carragher said to me on the last day, he said, do you know what your big mistake was here? And I said, no, go on, tell me. He said, we've been coached, he said, we've had Benitez for 2.5 years, and you know, it's been pretty rigid, the coaching, the messages, and I mean, Jamie liked that. I mean, Jamie was a big fan of Benitez, so it wasn't a criticism in any way, but he said, you've come in and you've done the same thing. He said, you'd have been better off adopting a different approach. And that brings us back really to, you know, your first question to me today. When you came in here, was your first thoughts to do this or that? But I didn't have that. I had, right, this has worked well at Fulham, you know, it worked well at Blackburn. People accepted that we were going to be very structured and organised and play that type of football. So I'm going to do that here. And we're going to get better because where our faults are, we're going to organise and structure ourselves out of them. But maybe it's not always possible to do that.
What you were sort of saying was that they wanted more freedom. They wanted just the go and play type.
Probably more of that, you know. Probably more training sessions whereby they weren't required to concentrate and focus and take on board information. Maybe they wanted a few sessions where there was more play and the coaching would have been more subtle. I think if I was to think back to the type of coaching sessions we did there, I wouldn't do that again. You know, I've evolved a little bit from that and tried to find a way of getting the same messages, keeping the same philosophy, but maybe in a slightly different way. But again, it's wisdom with hindsight. It's always very easy to get your decisions right with hindsight. And especially you don't necessarily change your moods either. The way you're feeling about yourself, the way you're feeling about things then, maybe is not how I'm thinking about it now. I'm just wishing that I had the sort of wisdom I can use to answer your questions now, then, but I didn't have it.
Did it hurt you?
Yeah, oh yeah, of course it did. It was the second time I'd been sacked. Blackburn, of course, was the first. This one was the second time. And I was just very fortunate, really, that West Brom, who were very, very good to me, and where once again I could sort of rekindle, if you like, A, the love of the game, and B, get the love of the fans and the club back. I was very doubtful about whether I want to do that. But luckily, Dan Ashworth worked hard to persuade me you should do it. And it saved me in a way, because it got me back onto a track which I thought I should be on, and also I was able, I think, to learn a lot of lessons then. It rebooted me to some extent, and I think sometimes in life, if you're going to have a long spell in coaching, you need rebooting from time to time, and it's good if you've got some people around you who can help you reboot.
I love this picture so much. This is one of, I mean, you look really cool in that picture, and Paul Ince as well. And I was looking through the list of names. It's quite easy, I think, to forget some of these names of these superstars that you managed. I'm going to pass this page as well, because I mean, look, Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo as well. I'm going to list some of these names out for people at home that are watching. Roberto Baggio, Roberto Carlos, Diego Simeone. I mean, Djorkaeff, there's some incredible names of players that you managed. Not always easy, I imagine. Well, how would you describe your time at Inter, both times at Inter?
Well, funny enough, that was a time which I really regard as a temporary period at Inter. They got into some difficulties in that particular season. I'd left after 2 seasons, and those 2 seasons went quite well. There was no Ronaldo, and Paul was there though, so that first picture is there with when Paul was there. But this one, when I came back, was a brief spell where it was a really stellar Inter team that had been put together with some of the biggest stars. You've mentioned 3 or 4, but there were more. You know, there was Andrea Pirlo, there was Paulo Sousa, there was Adam Winter, there was Zamorano, you know, the list went on, Diego Simeone, the list went on and on. Well, Ronnie was just actually one of them. And that was a difficult time. I don't think I handled it very well, to be perfectly honest. There was a lot of problems within the dressing room, partly because of Ronaldo had his group and Diego Simeone had his group. And I certainly didn't manage that well. You talk about, you know, your diplomatic and empathetic skills. They didn't seem to be too much in evidence there. That's quite a nice picture, that, because most of the time I never got the feeling that Ronaldo had much time for me, and I certainly was often quite angry with him for certain aspects of his behaviour. So it's quite nice to know we must have had a few moments when we got on quite well together. He had a bad knee injury and he had to stop playing, and that didn't help because then he was on the sidelines. And Lippi was scheduled to come. He left Juventus in January, I think, but he wouldn't come for this short period when they were doing badly. So Muggins got brought back in to try and hold the fort a little bit. I probably wanted to do too much to, well, I'm going to come in now and I'm going to change all this around, whereas it was an impossible task. I should have come in and made certain that things were a bit calmer than they were. I poured oil on the waters rather than calming them.
So let's just talk about England, and obviously you had 4 years with England from 2012 to 2016. What are your memories, what are your thoughts? Do you still think about England? Do you still think about the tournaments? Do you still think about what happened in the job?
Well, you think about the tournaments, because I mean that was where the failure occurred, really. I don't think we did too badly in the qualifiers, and I don't think we did too badly in our approach to the job in terms of trying to rejuvenate what was quite an ageing team when we took over in 2012, albeit if you talk about tournaments, that was our most successful tournament, although I do remember that game against Italy where we were so totally and utterly outplayed, really, but we got it through to penalties. But you know, it was pretty clear, I think, to us then that this team does need some rejuvenation.
It was the end of the golden generation.
End of the golden generation.
Yeah,
they were good players. I still think that, you know, if you say to me who are some of the best players you work with, I would revert to that team and name some of those players because they were really good. And then when the tournaments came around, we just didn't find. I mean, tournament football, that really is the ultimate knockout football, and we didn't find the performances in those tournaments, I think, that we perhaps had in some of the matches going into it. Now, what's the reason for that? I'm not 100% certain. Well, I mean, obviously, it's something which I did wrong and something that we as a coaching group didn't get right. That's very clear. I'm not trying to move away from that. But it's not easy for me to be 100% certain what exactly it was. Other than, I think maybe towards the end, we'd had that 20 game, we had 20 qualifiers without defeat, we'd had 10 straight wins, we'd had 1 or 2 quite good wins in friendlies in places like Brazil and Germany. Yeah. And I think we maybe towards the end...
Beat France, didn't we, as well?
Beat France. Yeah. I think maybe we got to the stage where, or at least I did, where we thought the way to get the performances from the player was to keep reminding them how good they are. We're good enough to do this, and everything we need to win the games here in the room, I think probably if I had my time again, I'd be a little bit more critical of some of the players and some of the performances, and not quite as kind in terms of trying to cajole them and convince them that you can do this, you're good enough. I think now, especially after the experiences of the years since then, I would be much more inclined to be critical of performances. But again, I'm trying hard to find reasons why we failed. There could be loads of others, but I don't look back on the time as being failure from start to finish. What I look back on it as is when you're the England coach and you get 2 tournaments, and in both tournaments you don't do anywhere near as well as you should do, then unfortunately that's a failure.
I think in Brazil it was quite clear that the squad weren't quite there, and we were coming out of one team into another. But in 16, I don't think I've played a lot of games during my career, and I only coached a few with Valencia. But I don't think I've ever thought of much about a game as I have about Iceland since then. In terms of, you were in the stadium that night, I was in that stadium. About what happened, and I've even spoke to a couple of the players, and they can't describe what happened that night, because we went in front and everything was. Yeah. We started really well. Yeah. And do you ever? You must think about that game. You must think about the experience of it. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that it was too easy in that game to get caught up in that. Some things are not meant to be. That's a danger. It seemed to me in that game we drifted to that defeat, and I'd like to have thought we could have done something more. I could have done something more to stop that drift, but I don't know, quite frankly, what it would have been. We didn't have the bench that necessarily would have stopped that drift per se, and they were a difficult team to play against. It's like when you're with a Premiership team, you play in the FA Cup against a team from lower Division 1 or Division 2, and you think, well, our players are so much better than their players and we've got to win this. And then you get out there and you just can't get going, and your players can't establish that we're better. And that I think was the case on that day. So I've got to say that what I've learned to do is to try and let things go, because there is no point in allowing in a career which has not really had that many failures, allowing a failure at one stage to suddenly derail everything that you believe in and think you can still do. That would have been a pity had I allowed that to happen. And the only way I could stop that happening was to let it go.